lot of times I get asked why Android, and that I've been doing Android development since way before we actually had real phones. One of my big concerns, and that is I want to have a device that's my communications, got my data on it, that I trust implicitly. And that's going to require people, being able to vet what's going on inside these devices. That's way easier when it's an open source operating system, where you can take a look at a lot of the source code. Maybe not all, but we can get a lot closer than we can with your traditional proprietary mobile operating systems. And so that's why I've been getting into Android. I don't have the technical skills to make that device, but if I can help raise Android in general, one hopes that other people and that will be able to come in and solve that particular problem and give us the devices that we can trust. Yeah, well, I mean, particularly here in 2013, and that we're starting to see a veritable explosion in these open source mobile operating systems. It used to be it was Android, and there'd be some interest in Maemo or Moblin or things like that. But now we've got Firefox OS going to be available shortly. There's going to be Sailfish. There's going to be Tizen and Ubuntu Mobile. And so these give us more opportunities. They're basically more shots of being able to create devices that are both mass market friendly, yet give us that sort of a device that we can trust and that we know what's going on under the covers. Will any of those be the success that Android's been? Maybe, maybe not. But the more basically mind share there is on open source mobile, and that is generally better overall for trying to achieve some of these privacy and security objectives. Now you get to the questions of, well, are we there yet? I mean, do we have Android devices that we can trust implicitly? Certainly, compared to some of the alternatives, we're in reasonable shape, and that a lot of people have taken a look at the Android open source code. Security experts have been poring over it, finding various holes that eventually get fixed. On the other hand, there's still limits. It's not all that easy necessarily for somebody else to come up with their own remix or distro of Android that's maybe security focused, and that you can easily put on an ordinary consumer grade device. Some devices support that sort of replacement. No, a lot of devices unfortunately don't. Well, there's been progress in that area. There's a lot more that needs to be done so that, even though maybe the device from the manufacturer is more, aimed at ordinary people, and that you can dial in how much security you want and need, and that without necessarily voiding the warranty and that, or, winding up with a phone that's more of a paperweight when you're done. Android is, of course, powering lots of things nowadays. I just heard a figure from Pandora, and that where they think that their device database of the available devices that they've seen that Pandora for Android is running on is like 10,000, and of course that runs the gamut. It's a lot of phones, it's a lot of tablets, but it's also other stuff. It's airplane seatback entertainment systems. It is appliances. It's televisions, game consoles, and so on. And so some people may be concerned that, oh no, we're going to wind up with another monoculture, the way we wound up with Windows being overly dominant. I don't think Android's going to get there, but Android's not going away anytime real soon, and its open source nature gives us the ability to get it out into a lot of different areas that other operating systems just aren't going to be able to do. One of the things a lot of people comment on is how much I do on StackOverflow. It's like over 9,000 answers that I've delivered out there, there's a reasonable amount of time involved in typing all those things in. And so people wonder, why am I bothering? Am I just keyed on getting that StackOverflow reputation rating up real high? I don't particularly care about that. But StackOverflow and similar sorts of things are my primary way of marketing. You're not going to see ad banners for my books. You're not going to see billboards on Highway 101 and that saying, that you want to go, get some consulting or training or whatever, and that I'm providing. And that my way of marketing is the very sorts of things that I'm trying to sell. It's delivering knowledge. And that is trying to help people get over these technical hurdles. figuring that, okay, well, if I give away some of this for free, and that they may realize, hey, maybe there's other things that this CommonsWare guy and that's going to be able to do to help me solve other technical problems, and that in one form or another. Android is very much reminiscent, in contrast with, say, like iOS, and that from the way, say, Windows was to OS X. Windows tended to give you a lot more capability in terms of tailoring the environment, changing things up, and that, which is a double-edged sword. Android is much the same way, and that users seem to have some challenges in figuring out all the possible things that their Android device can do, because it's like you having the Swiss Army knife and then trying to figure out, okay, well, which one of these blade things is what I'm supposed to use to solve this problem. You run into the same sorts of issues in that if it's got too many bells and whistles, and that how do I get any particular thing done. iOS has done, in general, a better job of trying to help people stay on task at any one point in time, with downsides of being able to rapidly switch between things and do multiple things at one time, which is where Android's strengths are. And so it really is going to kind of depend on the user. Which sort of model and that are they more comfortable with in terms of how they want to interact with their device, what they want out of it. In terms of what developers run into on Android that's a problem, that kind of comes in waves, and that there is kind of the panic attack du jour, and that when it comes to really any platform development that's a rapidly evolving platform, and Android certainly is one of those. And so, it used to be, threading, and that making sure how we're handling our, configuration changes, like when the user rotates the screen or drops their tablet into a keyboard dock. How are we handling those things? That used to be a huge concern. It's still somewhat of a concern, but it has ebbed a little bit as the earlier concern, we've gotten more knowledge out there. People understand more, okay, here are some tried and trusted patterns, that if you follow these steps and that, it'll generally going to work. Nowadays, it's, you run into things like the new mapping subsystem. They've replaced the original maps that we were able to add to our Android application with a new, more powerful one. But they changed all the APIs around, and that there's new challenges in terms of how do you determine what devices are going to be able to use these maps, be able to, and how do you translate constructs from the old mapping to the new one. And so there's tons of people from, not being able to get the basic hello world of map sample from the documentation to run, all the way up to, well, how do I pull off this particular trick now that I have a totally different way of interacting with the maps. If I had been on the Android team way back when and was working on trying to set things up, the number one thing that seems to be a constant undercurrent among all the questions and that is this context, and that we're constantly passing context objects around to various methods and that. And well, what context do you use? And that because there's a handful of them, and it's not necessarily all that clear what's the right one to use in any given circumstance. And yet we're constantly having to provide these in for everything from being able to get a translated version of a string to being able to, render a user interface. And so that feels like one of those things that started fairly simple and then kept getting stuff glommed more and more and more and more on it. And now we've got this big ball of wax that we're all trying to deal with. If there were a way of trying to simplify that so that we're not dealing with quite so many of those questions, and that would have been a useful thing to do. In terms of Android here in 2013, Android is, we're certainly going to see an Android 5.0, possibly, in the time frame of the Google I/O conference. We're going to continue to see a steady march in new devices, probably some new form factors. Google Project Glass is going to start rolling out at least to developers this year in all likelihood. Maybe we'll see more movement, say, in the smartwatch category. So in terms of official Android and what Google's doing in that, it's going to just be a steady progression, more of the same. We're going to be seeing, more manufacturers get into Android, and that particularly in areas that aren't your typical handsets, aren't your typical tablets, where they're deploying Android in all sorts of different areas. And that you're just going to continue to see more and more developers get on board with Android, particularly for things that aren't necessarily stuff you're going to be distributing on the Play Store, enterprise apps, small businesses, government, schools, and that apps for niche audiences, and that where some of the traditional concerns about what's suitable for the Play Store, how do you distribute these things, get changed, and that giving us new and exciting challenges to deal with.